Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. I've paused recording new episodes for a break here at the end of 2022, but that doesn't mean that you have to go without. In the spirit of reinforcing my intention to create on-demand resources that stand the test of time, and that these episodes are not the you had to be there each week when they were released type, please enjoy some of my select replay episodes that have great guests, fantastic conversations, and valuable topics for elevating the architectural profession, especially as it pertains to the role of technology in the evolution of architectural practice. If you want even more, please check out my Troxel episode database, TED for short, at trxl.co/TED, where you can find my entire catalog of episodes categorized by keywords and more. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.
It's been pretty wild to kind of see where I thought things would be, but reflecting back in January, February, when I'm working with my staff and some clients to do let's start mapping out these projects for 2020, and then everything just went bananas, and trying to make up ground in some areas, seeing new opportunities in other areas which we didn't anticipate happening. It's been a roller coaster for sure. From a business standpoint.
I remember having a conversation with Dave Gilmore probably about this time last year, and it was like, we're 12 years into a 10-year recession cycle. And it's like, so what's the outlook? And it was like, the next 5 years look amazing, and then 3 months later, it's like, holy crap, throw the plans out.
And it's a different type of recession than what we experienced in 2008. Completely different, because we haven't necessarily exposed some major flaw in the market that required a massive correction, which is what we saw in 2008, housing crisis.
Completely different.
This is like a completely external factor. And that has made any kind of prediction on, what are the recovery plans? What actions should we be taking as businesses? Is this going to last 3 months? Is it going to last 1 year? Is it going to be, 2 years? You don't know when things are really going to recover. And if I think about California and the movie and entertainment industry, that is something I love. I am a big fan of movies. I'm a big fan of going to the theater and seeing how that shift is going to happen for the movie industry, and what happens to theater chains, what happens to how we get our content. Are they going to need to figure out a video on demand thing? Are we going to see
what is entertainment anymore? Fundamental questions.
Well, I have to say, one of the things I've been experiencing on a personal level when it comes to any form of new content is that I can't consume it. I'm in a mindset at the moment where new content is really hard to absorb. But I have great luck kind of going back into stuff that I always enjoyed. Maybe it's a kind of thinking about something familiar, thinking about some foundational stuff. So some people ask me, are you caught up on, the second season of The Boys? And I'm like, nah, I basically just watch Star Trek: The Next Generation every night.
Dude, we're watching that too.
That just makes me feel better. I just want something that's
so clean, right?
So clean. They resolve these plots, and they deal with heavy issues that we're all dealing with right now.
Yeah.
But they come at it from different angles. Star Trek: The Next Generation is my comfort blanket.
I hear that, man. I mean, there's not too many things. I was just having a conversation with my friend on our other podcast about the thank God for these two shows, and it was the Great British Baking Show and the Mandalorian in this case.
My wife's been watching the Great British Baking Show. She loves that show. My son watches it with her.
Yeah.
I'm not into cooking shows. I can't do them.
It's a family thing for us. This is like the show we watch together, and that and the Mandalorian, which just started up this week, and then Next Generation. Like there's 8 seasons. We're on season 3, and we're working our way through it. On Netflix, and it's fantastic. I mean, I do sleep through a lot of them. Like it's just like that's
great. If you want to just go to bed, like throw on some TNG, you're out
right.
by the second act. I mean, and then a part of it's just because I've seen them all so many times. A good set of episodes keeps me up. Like, the series finale, All Good Things. Parts 1 and 2. I'll burn through that because I was in grade school when that came out.
Yeah.
And it was like one of the first TV shows where my mom let me stay up past 10.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because she's like, she knew how much I love Trek, so she's like, okay, you can stay up and watch the series finale. And so I'll always sit through and watch that one. The other one is the Best of Both Worlds, parts 1 and 2, of course, where Captain Picard gets assimilated by the Borg.
Yeah.
Huge set of episodes.
Yeah. Fundamental, formational, I should say. Yeah, like in your like, who you are.
Wow.
Yeah.
And also it's like one of those things where it was new for TV because you left on such a cliffhanger because the first episode ends with Riker like looking at the assimilated Picard and giving the order to fire.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And then it just ends. You had to wait a year to find out what happens. And you're like, we had no idea, like that kind of television where you don't know what's going to happen. Like right. Trek was known to have, plots just sort of resolve themselves after an hour, but you're like, Picard, are they going to, is Picard off the show now? Like, we don't know. Like,
wow. Yeah. And you think back to how TV shows worked, right? And it was very much like they were kind of standalone, especially in like these kinds of episodes, right? They could stand on their own, and then they string a few together, and then they string them over the off season together. Oh, painful, just painful. Yeah, sure. That's awesome. Yeah, that's good to hear that you guys have at least some respite in the something that's not like changing the world right under our feet. It's like it is something nice to go back to that nostalgia and that like you said, it's like comfort food. It totally is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need more of that. And and when it comes to just the uncertainty of our industry, I mean, I've been observing firms adapt. I've been observing firms having to change as well, and then make hard choices.
Right.
But then I'm also seeing different groups embrace data and models in ways that I wouldn't have anticipated happening this year. I didn't think certain things were going to flip. And so when it comes to our business model, if I would have projected who our client base was going to be in 2020 back in January, it looks very different than what I thought. I mean, there's been a growth in our kind of owner-operator market over the last couple of years. I'm like, okay, well, that pie is going to continue to grow, and maybe in 3 years' time, it'll be the dominant voice in our kind of services. That actually kind of happened overnight in a way that I wasn't expecting this year. Where all of a sudden we're doing business with retailers and healthcare campuses.
Wow.
And it's been like, wait a minute, where'd that come from? Yeah. And sure enough, I mean, a lot of it has to do with folks that are trying to just recalibrate their business and also look for opportunities in like this kind of very expensive and slow and risky building delivery process, and look for opportunities to push that forward.
When you don't even know if you're going to need that thing.
Right.
Yeah, or what to do with it, how you're going to be allowed to use it. There's so much kind of unknown there. It's pretty crazy. It's interesting to watch some clients like double down on like, there's nobody in our buildings, let's do a bunch of stuff, or let's build new ones or whatever. And then there's the other ones who are like, man, we have just no clue what's actually going to happen, and we can't bet the farm on it, on it being going back to the way that it was. There's two completely different mindsets. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and it was like we brought up the deal that REI just went through recently, where they had this, I think it was an NBBJ or Gensler designed campus up in Seattle. You know about this? They like a brand new campus, like huge campus. They had not even moved into it yet when all this happened. It was supposed to open like in June, and they completed the project, never moved in, and put it up for sale. And Facebook bought it. And I think it's such a weird like paradigm shift that we're seeing right in front. Like REI is brick and mortar. REI is the great outdoors. They're retail. Obviously they have this online component, but Facebook, a digital company, doubles down on physical space and says, yep, we'll take that. And because the way that we work, we've found it's best when people are together. And like, they're just like, that's a fully digital, like you could think that Facebook could easily operate in over the internet 100% all the time. I think that's really interesting to kind of watch how people are kind of strategizing for the future in very different ways.
One of the things that I've heard play out is architecture companies that, it's been a thing that people have been saying, they've told me this for years when I was doing my, cutting my teeth on projects at MBBJ and elsewhere, is that design is not something that you can easily do in a remote capacity. Mm-hmm. And there was always a reluctance to sort of let someone work from home. It always seemed like the pressure was on to be present in the studio and to work. But that switch flipped overnight. And in parallel with that concern, had always been when we would do strategic engagements, we would see that one of the biggest areas of friction that their IT groups were concerned about, principals were concerned about, any lead of a project was concerned about, was work sharing and how they can start to leverage staff across offices and across, the United States or globally. And two things have happened on that front. One, I think the architecture companies, by and large, have proven that, hey, design and the design process for buildings can happen remotely, and people can get their home offices set up, and people can be efficient in talking to each other over these virtually, which I think is a really interesting kind of paradigm shift for many.
Yeah.
There's certainly struggles with it. There's no doubt about it, but it's being proven that it can be done. The thing that is another benefit of the whole shift has been reflections on, wow, all of a sudden I seem to be able to work share. I don't know if it was like a psychological thing about there being a physical office in play or something like that, but all of a sudden, when people went to work from home, they had to be more self-sufficient, and maybe they started to be a little bit more also outgoing. Like, hey, I'm going to chat with I'm in Detroit. I'm going to chat with my buddy over in Los Angeles and see if there's any work that I can help with. Yeah. And so it becomes like this sort of personal initiative that's occurring, and the boundaries of these offices are kind of dissolving, and large companies are starting to realize that, hey, we can actually pull off this one company thing in a way that we didn't think we could before.
It's really interesting because it is, I think of two things when you're kind of talking about this stuff. Number one is, you've seen that meme about what forced your company to go fully digital, right? Was it the CEO, the CTO, or was it COVID-19? And obviously COVID-19 was circled. So urgency is everything. Because we didn't have to change before, we didn't change. I think it's actually like that simple, right? And so it's like, this is comfortable. This is what we know. This is how we've done it. And this forced everybody to kind of rethink that. Number two, like, luckily, the infrastructure of the internet is in place to enable this to happen. That's a huge, huge thing. I think now what companies are struggling with is having business licenses everywhere so that they can have actual employees everywhere or anywhere. It was probably a better way to say it, because I know we've struggled with that in our firm. It's somebody wants to move to a different state, and obviously they're going to do that. It's a life change. It's a big decision, and can't continue to work for the company because we don't technically do business there and don't plan on it. So it starts to bring up ideas around like, how can we lobby the laws to change around this so that we can have people wherever they want to be without incorporating their own business, without bringing on other companies to work for as consultants, because like in our industry as well, you have to do that. You can't just work for one company and be a consultant, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's other, like it's actually just put the spotlight on some of these other issues that are always lurking, but no one really pays attention to until you need to address it. And now it's like, oh man, we're going to lose that person. They were amazing. Somebody else is going to get them because of these kind of laws that no one was paying attention to before.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, like we all live in different states on our team. We're only 5 people. One of the things that is really taking the edge off of that from a logistics standpoint is that we have an HR company that we contract with that handles all the state by state setup. They're basically treating like anyone that's contracted with them as an HR resource, as
nice.
They're one big company.
Yeah.
So I'm able to we had a team member, Kristen, who was working with me here in Omaha, and she wanted to make a life change and move to Oklahoma to be closer to her son. And she, with TriNet, we're able to say like, hey, I've got an employee moving, and they can act on behalf of the company to get all of the requisite Secretary of State
nice
state tax set up in those other states, and it kind of makes it pretty seamless in some ways.
Yeah.
Setup is not necessarily inexpensive at the outset, but once it's all set up, we're all good to go.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to think about that from a small firm perspective as well, where there's lots of potential for shared resources, but kind of combining together and acting more like a large firm with those shared resources without being a large firm, right? So that's one of the hardest things about competing with large firms is just their access to resources and having all of this infrastructure in place and having specialized teams to handle certain things while your design team is doing what they do and your business development team is doing what they do. So obviously, if you're the small shop, you're doing all those things. So it seems really interesting to me, like from our scale of our profession, that lots of small firms have the ability now to kind of band together with these back-end resources and therefore, combine to conquer and then compete with these larger firms.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think, it's a lot of changes in licensing models for technology is also equipped that. If I think back, back in when I was in LA, before I joined CASE, which is the group out of New York City, that really got me started on the whole building information modeling, computational design consulting side of things, pulled me away from conventional practice. Before that, I was actually sketching up a little business plan. I'm like, if I were to move somewhere, go back to the Midwest and I needed to set up my own company, what would be the startup cost?
Yeah.
And this was pre-Office 365, subscription software hadn't really come into play yet.
Right.
And the first cost of getting the right licensing for all the stuff I would have to do, it was much higher, at least on paper when I was sketching it all out. And then subscription models started to change that a bit. So the first cost was less. You're paying more in the long run, I think, for a lot of these things. But I think the advantage for small companies is there when it comes to hey, I can actually spin something up and have these tools ready to go for me, and it's not going to be as financially difficult. But then when you get to the scale of a firm like yours, you have things have moved to subscription, and now you're talking about I'm just assuming here kind of increased costs of software over time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, huge. It's interesting because on the small firm scale, it reduces the need potentially to 100% of IT. You just don't need IT to spool up a Creative Cloud, subscription to spool up a BIM 360 subscription, whatever those things might be. So like, yeah, they're taking those kinds of the hours it takes to kind of figure all that stuff out, to deploy it, to get it, like those companies have kind of taken over that. In large companies, we've got both. We've got the subscription fees and like the big numbers of people using those things, but we also have the full-time IT department because, I mean, this kind of starts to point at your blog post that you put on Proving Ground about computers being hard, right?
Yeah.
It's actually not easier to deal with, right? It is easier, but it doesn't mean it's not hard, I think is how you put it.
It's really strange to see and think about when we think about the promise of technology for the building industry and in general. You know, there's a couple of things I always like to think of as pointers that are kind of determining what are we making some level of progress in some areas and over others. Mm-hmm. Lower costs of software, and pushing towards something that maybe once specialized to a commodity type of scenario the establishment of skill sets at one point being highly specialized requires advanced skill set, the need for that skill set to, basically enter the general population. And now it's, you're in that kind of early and late majority of adoption. So, the skill set becomes less, maybe in demand or, might be more of a commoditized skill set now. In some areas that has happened, we can look and maybe you can even reflect on this at your company, but visualization, rendering.
Huge changes.
Just in the last couple of years, right. Even, which is bananas. Like I remember burning the midnight oil on a rendering for doing competitions between 2007 through 2012 or whatever, when I was working at MBBJ, and then you're coordinating with an outsourced rendering company in some cases. And so there's like time invested in that. But in the last couple of years, my wife's an architect. So, and she also does a fair amount of rendering as part of her normal day-to-day business. Enscape comes along, and it's that tools like that, Lumion as well, they just caught on like wildfire. Yep. You're like, boom, okay, I don't have to wait for my V-Ray rendering to get a decent image, and I can do post-production on it if necessary. So it's like, all of a sudden you saw this like bundle of hours that were going into producing these images basically shrink to a few minutes.
They're free. Yeah, they're totally free now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, in the parallel with that, it was also interesting to see how the VR conversation changed with those commodity tools kind of entering it.
Yeah.
Because you would see firms investing rather substantial sums of money to try to be the first on the VR front and bring VR to their clients and test to see how that was going to help sell a design or inform a client on how some space is going to feel. But then, these tools come along where it's like a couple of button pushes and you've got yourself an experience.
Yeah. It's like the iPhone app model, right? Where I was thinking about this when I was reading through your Computers Are Hard article, because it seemed, I think you published that in April of this year. And then we saw the open letter to Autodesk and to Andrew Agnost from the 30 firms in the UK. And to me, if I were just to distill that down, it was like, this is too difficult to use. For how much we're paying for it, it's getting harder to use. It's taking more expertise and specialization. We're actually having to hire new additional roles to manage this stuff because you keep changing the management model on the user side. I know we've done that at our firm. We have a BIM 360 person. That's all they do is they set up BIM 360. And it's that big of a job. And we've got a full-on training department to train people on how to use this because it's not push button, right? There's a million buttons. There's not one, right? So it's interesting to see the rendering example go from, because when I took a tangent from architecture at one point, I think this was in, I'm trying to guess, 1999, right? And I went off and started my own visualization company, which was me, myself, and I. And I had a few computers laying around, and I had to do all of the network rendering myself. I had to buy the software to do it and pay for it all up front. It was $4,000 or something to buy the software. I was Electric Image in that case, if anybody wants to go down memory lane with me, and using Form Z for modeling. So I purchased all these things up front. I was doing all of the management myself. You would wait for days for those renderings to come together, right? And like if you're doing animation, it's days, if not weeks. Network rendering, frames coming back black. You've got errors that you've got to deal with. And like you said, now it's just free. It's $500 for Enscape. It looks good enough. And I would even add on top of that original rendering, you also had to be either a Photoshop or an After Effects artist as well. Right. To do all of the correction, and we started coming up with all this crazy multi-layered rendering so that we could adjust in post, because everybody knew it was way better to adjust with the slider in Photoshop rather than re-render a frame, right? So we had matte ID layers and depth layers and diffuse and reflect. Like you could adjust it all after the fact. Those were the pros. Now, just pop off another rendering, like no big deal, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch that, like that whole, that's like a canyon that's been carved. And you look at it, the other kind of parallel canyon that's been carved with Revit, for instance, and it's just you have to be more and more and more of an expert, not the Enscape model.
Yeah, and it's not it's not getting any cheaper either. Mm-hmm. Revit, and it's also Revit's been on an 18-year trajectory.
Yeah.
I think we often forget how old Revit is, and not to say there hasn't been, improvements and things of that nature as it's gone along. And it's a very sticky software. It's really hard to think about, if there was going to be a new platform that's going to come in and change up the industry in some way, what that would look like, because of all of it's not just about like making a switch for your company. You have to think about, okay, well, I need to be able to integrate with my structural engineers,
yep.
my MEP,
all that training,
contractor, all the trades. And so thinking about a platform switch is extremely difficult. Yep. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the amount of training that goes into maintaining the software, people having to employ coders and software developers to get the tool to do what it needs to do in order to overcome certain hurdles in a practice. Yeah. Tools like Dynamo and Grasshopper, they've introduced the visual programming paradigm, which is, low code theoretically.
Mm-hmm. But you still need a high level of expertise. Yeah.
You need a high level of expertise to do it. And that's an often overlooked side of this. I mean, if you would have talked to Nate Miller 10 years ago when I was first getting into Grasshopper, and really starting to adopt that, you would have asked me, I'd be like, oh, well, the future is, the architects and everyone's going to be using this in 10 years. It's going to be like, very democratized and more people are going to be using Grasshopper. It's true that it's far more spread out now. You can find folks that have had exposure to it in school and are coming into practice. It's still very rare to find the expert kind of computational talent out there.
Right.
It's very, very hard. And a couple of levels above that, you have the ability to write software at all. Mm-hmm. And that is extremely hard to find. And I think a lot of it is driven by, I'm not going to be the person to say that, hey, you're going to need to, architects are going to have to learn how to code. I'm not going to be that person to say that. Some people find that surprising that I would be one that doesn't say it. There's just so much on the backs of architects right now, all the responsibility.
Yep.
To be a good project manager, like that takes dedication to make that happen. And there's not enough bandwidth for someone to be like, hey, if I've got talent in this space to run a good project, to then be like, okay, well, I have to learn how to code too. That's hard. Very competent design professionals out there that are paying attention to materials and experience. That's a form of specialization. The idea that you can understand the building code to evaluate your project is another set of knowledge and experience. And there's a lot of responsibility that falls on building design and construction professionals. And to think, okay, we're going to layer in expert software development at the same time, it's a really hard pill to swallow, I think, for many. Not to say that it's not delivering value where, practices are finding value. There's some extremely talented people in practice right now that are doing some crazy cool stuff, but that's a rare thing.
Yeah, I think there's also just kind of this. I don't know if many people think about it this way, but I definitely do. Is I think you have to be a generalist to become a leader in a company like that, instead of an expert. And so at some level, I think there's this weight on people, potentially at least. Do you go down this expertise route and basically get pigeonholed? I get, to put it bluntly, to do this thing for a very long time. Or are you able to, and can you then pivot and take a step back and enable others to do that so that you can oversee this very complicated profession that we live and work within? Or not? Or do you go the other generalist route and become, the orchestrator of architecture, but not the doer of tasks specific to any particular role that it takes to have a successful building happen these days? Because honestly, like, people who are really good project managers and really good project architects and really good coders, like, there's a lot of value there. And so that, like, it makes sense, I think, for them to kind of stay there, but also, like, realize that as far as like corporate ladders go, like, it's kind of not an option for people like that.
It's hard, and I think there is a bit of trailblazing that has yet to happen. Perhaps, like, if I think that I have friends and have had friends that have had that anxiety of, like, I'm getting pigeonholed into this rendering role. Like, I'm really good at it, but I feel like that's all I'm getting now. Or people, like, sending me their project just to render, and there's, in my view, there's two paths. There is one path, which is like, absolutely, you're going to get pigeonholed and you might need to change direction and, try to generalize yourself a little bit more. Or you take that experience and you try to pivot it into something bigger. So if you're really good at rendering and people are recognizing your talent in this space of visualization, you should be advocating for and gunning for a role such as like an art director, for a company, or kind of looking at being a creative director in that same company, and you could potentially carve that out for yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Same with, like, if you're ace on the coding front and you're bringing like some kind of technology knowledge to your company, and your company may not have like a CTO or CIO position yet. Maybe that becomes your trajectory, and that you start to really push your leadership on, like, hey, I can do this, but I can also see the bigger picture, and let's put our heads together and create a strategy for how, I may be able to get there to a level where I'm at the table with y'all to help make decisions for the company.
I guess the distinction that I make, and I absolutely agree with you, because I know among other people than myself who have done similar things to what you just said, like, I know personally somebody who did exactly what you just said, from visualization to creative director. And it takes a willingness to let go of being the one who pushes the buttons and pulls the knob, because if you can't let go of that, you can't do it all. Like, you can't be the one who makes the renderings and does the creative direction, because they both take so much time. And I honestly feel like leadership, from that more generalist perspective that I described earlier, really requires you to be willing to share in that burden, but also share in the success of what people can do when they're enabled to do something well. Somebody needs to be the advocate for those people. Like, it can't all be self-advocating. And I think that's where a lot of people fall short in that, in actually becoming leaders, is that they still feel kind of, I don't know. I think it's just like they really like doing it. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But they also have kind of worked their way up this seniority ladder that doesn't square with the kind of enabling that they need to be doing to others within a company.
That certainly resonates with me, for sure, in the kind of the business ownership side of things, and trying to build up a company that has certainly a level of specialization among the staff, but
still wanting to make tools.
Yeah, and myself, wanting to code and wanting to build stuff up and have experience doing that. And the idea of letting go is it's hard, but in some ways, if you get the right team and you get people that you can trust, you can do it. It's really hard to let go if you don't trust your people.
Yes.
And then you can focus on mentoring in some way. That's something that I'm learning how to do and trying to learn how to do. If I can get my team, one of my team members to kind of go off and do their thing, and maybe they hit a roadblock in their development, or they have a question that I may have encountered before, and be able to say like, oh no, you should look at this. That to me gives me a thrill at the moment, like being able to sort of let the talent do the talent, but then when it comes to a critical juncture, I can like impart some knowledge and experience to help move the project forward. That's great. But I think the other side of it is also just trying to find fulfillment in other aspects. There are certain parts of the work that we do still that I'm deeply involved in. Like, I'm I code conveyor, and getting these help to get a lot of these products off the ground, and think about like that kind of model and how we might bring some things to market, and but also help maintain and help support these things almost as a user in some capacity. That's been exciting. There's other stuff like finding a hobby has been a great kind of mental reprieve, because if I'm like spending a day working on contracts, statements of work, executive summaries, those aren't necessarily the three things that I got into this business to do.
And like making YouTube videos, doing marketing,
and making YouTube training videos. Well, I've been really into 3D printing, and building, just fun stuff for my kid and for myself. And what that entails is like going back and doing just classic surface and solid modeling in Rhino, not worrying about if I need to get into Revit or not. I just need to worry about the STL.
Yeah. And not worrying about what the drawings are going to look like.
Yeah. And as much as I love Grasshopper and the computational paradigm, like I think at my core, I love modeling technique. I love
me too.
Clean meshes. I love the idea of working with surfaces and making just really nice, well-crafted models that if I take them to my printer, they're going to print and they're going to be really nice. I love that.
Yeah.
And, that's what I'll do, in the evenings and in the weekends. And it kind of, keeps me sharp with the tools. I can answer Rhino modeling questions still. That's like a thing. But on that note, just speaking of commodity, I don't know. Have you looked at the prices of 3D printers recently? What's HMC? Are you doing any?
Yeah, so we've got a series of kind of the Ultimaker, which are I wouldn't call them Cadillac, but I wouldn't call them Hondas either. They're somewhere in the middle. I don't know. What's nice about them is they just work, but I think that they're $3,000 to $5,000 each, something like that.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break to share more about our sponsors. You've heard about Avail here on the Troxel podcast, and I'm excited to tell you they have a new message for you, my friends. Avail is designed by designers for design professionals, so it's no wonder Avail focuses on visuals in its platform. While Avail has always provided high-resolution previews, there are some new visual enhancements you should know about. These are channel cards and key cards. They're visual gateways to your content, and they're both customizable. Channel cards have been available since Avail Desktop 4.0. Think of them like album covers for each content channel you create. Channel cards are designed to make navigating your firm's assets quick and easy. And with channel cards, the look and feel of Avail conforms with your firm's standards. Next up is key cards, and these are the latest addition to Avail and are available since version 4.3. What are they? Key cards visually group content within a channel, and they derive data from your tags to make finding content easier. So they're created from the work you've already done. By adding custom graphics to your key cards, navigating content within a channel improves immediately. Keycards also drive the breadcrumb trail in the latest Avail Desktop 4.3 release. Navigate through your channels using breadcrumbs. And a new breadcrumb control is displayed on a channel when navigating with keycards. Breadcrumb items allow the user to navigate to the previous state easily. To see all of these new visual enhancements in action, head over to getavail.com to learn more. That's getavail, GETAVAIL.com to learn more. And now let's get back to our conversation.
So what got me into it was a year ago. It was around Halloween. So I was looking at like people that were making costumes and stuff, and how 3D printing is so big in costuming and prop making,
cosplay and
all that stuff. I'm looking at what people are making. I'm like,
it's amazing.
Geez, how are they? What are they buying to get this stuff going?
Because they're pretty big pieces typically.
Yeah, some of them are big pieces. Some of them are also just the amount of post production that goes in. It could be on a small printer, but then they piece it all together, and then layer of Bondo, a lot of sanding, paint. It looks like a piece, like Iron Man costumes.
That's what I was going to say.
Bananas, like totally. Bananas. But I was like, okay, well, what are people using to make this? And I came on a model of 3D printer. It's called an Ender 3.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that.
Sub $200.
That's incredible.
They retail for like, you can get them. You can go to the Creality's website. They're like $179.99. Wow. A spool of PLA around anywhere between $18 and $25 for 1 kilogram of this stuff. You could get set up with an entire 3D printing shop. I have 2 Ender 3s over here in the corner that I'll have going. And with my first purchase was an Ender 3 and 2 spools of black, and it was like less than $250.
That's incredible.
And they work really well. It takes about an hour to self-assemble them. Handful of issues every now and then, like bed leveling. Mm-hmm. It doesn't auto level the bed, so you have to like kind of work with that. But I'm like, holy crap, why doesn't every architecture firm just give every staff member a 3D printer at this point? Because this stuff is powerful. Like,
can I tell you like the most frustrating story about 3D printers ever is like this thing is like I don't know if you can see behind.
Yeah.
But I've got a bunch of stuff. Like it's actually like printing algorithms. Like that's what this stuff is. I take my algorithm and I'll print it out because guess who likes to look at this stuff? Old architects. Old architects like to hold these things in their hands and like look through them, and it speaks a language that they speak, and it really helps kind of sell that. So the most frustrating story is like, this is magic. This thing came out of my computer. I didn't have to do hardly anything. Like I'm using open source software to create the file that creates the G code that the printer reads, and it just starts printing. The most frustrating thing is, wait, what? That thing takes 18 hours to print?
Yeah, it's the time.
I'm like, it's magic.
Yeah.
You're not even paying somebody to do that. It's magic. It's coming out. Yeah, but can it be faster? I'm like, oh man. And so it kind of goes back to that rendering thing, right? Where it's like, it used to take 18 hours to cook one frame overnight, with ray tracing, back in the day when we had 233 megahertz computers, right? And now they're free. And I wonder, like, are we going to get to the point where this is free, or direct to model fabrication, or like where that just happens and it happens fast? Is that going to happen with our drawings? Like, the validity of drawings as a deliverable in the future aside, potentially, could it be possible that we we have to get there? I think a lot of people forget that we have to get there to that point, and there is a process to getting there, and we're kind of figuring a lot of those things out right now. But it's also incredibly frustrating to have gone through the process where in school we built models by hand. We built study models out of chipboard and basswood and glue, and now everybody in school either doesn't model anything at all or they 3D print it. Like that's the only acceptable method of modeling nowadays for physical modeling. And I'm talking about guys who've been in the business for 30 plus years, and they're like, why isn't that faster? And it's like, come on, man. That's insane thing to say.
It is ridiculous. I mean, if I think about like what you had in your hand, what takes anywhere between 14 hours to do. It's a work day.
Yeah.
Let it go overnight. You'll have it by morning.
Exactly.
It's like it's overnight shipping for most parts, and that to me is fast, especially if you think about, the reduced cost of these machines, and that cost continues to reduce over time. A lot of these, the ABS printers that have the, very durable plastic, those require venting, and things like that. PLA printers do not. So you just have them sitting in your room and you don't have to worry about fumes. It's getting to the point where, apart from maybe the wait time, and I feel like you need to have a wait time because you want to make sure that the thing's not going to break, because you can really speed up these printers, but they end up with really fragile pieces.
But how much more satisfying was it back in the day with film cameras and Polaroids, where you had to wait for that thing to develop, or you had to send it out for processing? That's kind of what we're doing now. And I think in this world of kind of instant gratification, it's harder for me to stomach those complaints. It's there is something, like you were just saying in the very beginning here, about having to wait a whole off season for that cliffhanger to be resolved. There's something actually kind of
there is something
evolutionary about that, right? That makes it have more importance. And I kind of wonder, with the whole idea of push button building design, right? Or any of these things where it's kind of careful what you ask for, right? Because if it takes away the meaning of it and the importance of it and the kind of the weight of the decisions that went into that and the consideration and the synthesizing of all of the requests and constraints into, for going from complete uncertainty to certainty. This is a building. Here's why we did it. Here's what we're hoping to accomplish with it. And then we'll study it after the fact and make sure that it's actually doing those things. There's a lot of weight and meaning to all of that. And I would just, I guess my thinking right now is caution people to be careful what you ask for when it comes to speed and instant gratification for all of this stuff, because I don't feel like our business is well positioned to be easily accepting of always more efficient and always more productive, which is kind of what computers always promised and never delivered on, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's kind of there's got to be some an old parable or a wisdom in there to be careful about what we're actually asking for, or what certain people are asking for.
Yeah, I like that. And it also speed is one, volume of information is another. It's, what you've just described is in some ways been my kind of primary critique of this current hype and, in some ways fetishization over generative design and generative, a very kind of narrow kind of definition of that, which is the rapid optioneering and exploration of the design space, which always I've yet to see a study that has convinced me that
more is better.
More is better. Well, one, more is better, and number two, that the kind of algorithm curation of information that would go into the algorithm is producing anything other than a cartoon of the design process. There's so much that goes into planning a building, and it's one of the, every now and then we'll get hit up with hey, can you help us build an automatic space plan generator? And kind of my default response has become not really, and for a number of reasons. The amount of expertise that's required to build, say, a common clinic space, and the amount of edge cases that exist in a given footprint or an existing building, let's say an existing test fitting an existing commercial space, there is a lot to figure out in that.
Absolutely.
And you could invest your time into trying to make an algorithm that'll do it, but the algorithm, as you kind of go down that path, is going to have a narrower and narrower, and the more it's able to solve, the narrower and narrower the use case for that algorithm becomes, because it's okay, now I can only really apply this in this one kind of context.
Really specific. Yeah.
Becomes very specific. And, when I see attempts at those types of test fitting tools, they always either come off as to me, oversimplified studies, or the resultant output feels so generic and void of anything that I would really want to experience in like the urban landscape setting. And that might sound very old school to some people. Maybe as I get older, I start to become more and more of the codger of like, well, it's missing some kind of spirit of design or something like that. But, as I kind of go down this path and look at technology and look at, what's being produced and what the aim is, like for me, a driving factor in all of this stuff when I was first getting into Grasshopper, I was like, wow, I can start to realize some really powerful design vision that couldn't have been executed before, or wouldn't have been as easy to deliver before. And by some utilization or orchestration of technology, we can produce a built environment that is measurably better in terms of its experience and its performance than we could before. But this idea that technology can also be used to make stuff faster and as generic as possible is a real danger, I feel. All of a sudden we're using technology to create sameness rather than delight. And I think that's a problem. And that's sort of why I like to think about how can we start to orchestrate the tools to, not from an automation and optimization perspective, but kind of almost as a equipping of a designer and their intuition with more information to help, guide them to make better decisions, but also allow the kind of the intuitive aspects of, what does it feel like to be in the space? From an engineer's perspective, can I actually start to measure and verify that this thing is going to perform like I think it's going to be? Can I find some kind of new opportunity to introduce a structure that will save time and material cost, but also kind of support the design vision? That kind of maybe it doesn't create as buzzy of a sales pitch for new tools. Like you would say, like, hey, I can generate 1,000 options now. You can only generate 3. Like that's going to get a headline. It sounds awesome, but at the same time, like, so what?
And did you learn anything? I think that one of the things that often gets left out of that conversation is, personally, I could generate 2 or 3 schemes in the time that, and way longer of an amount of time that it would take that computer to generate 1,000. But between schemes 1 and 2 and between schemes 2 and 3, I have learned a lot about the project. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the thing that we see really lacking in these tools, is that it's not learning. It's just spitting out options. Like, it is really that simple. It's not saying this one's better because, and using that, I know there's a lot of like genetic algorithms out there that do attempt to kind of solve for different levels of fitness, that it is maybe getting more towards a point of optimizing for some goal. But like you said, there's so many inputs that we are synthesizing as real people and to real meaningful design and experience that is measurable at some point, hopefully, that it's really hard to capture all that in an algorithm. And therefore, like, I remember the early promise of generative design being like, it can give you options you would have never thought of as a potential starting point. Mm-hmm. But how is that any different than what you're already doing? Like, I already never thought of this project
until I started looking at the problem. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the idea that how do you know I wouldn't have thought of that? Like, that's like, can you really demonstrate I wouldn't have thought it? Like,
that's a broken argument for sure.
That's exactly right. It's a broken argument, or it's one that's like, I don't know if it's somewhat of some sort of fallacy.
Yeah, logical fallacy or something. Yeah,
a logical fallacy. I'm like, well, every project's like that. I could sit here with a piece of trace paper and design something after learning about the problem. But if I would have gone, but I just thought of it. Like, I never thought of this before until I actually started. It's like,
I think it's weird because, like, I think the people asking for this are not people who actually design buildings. They are somehow involved in the process where the company could get some kind of gain out of gaming that what they might call an antiquated process. But is it really going to make better architecture? I think, there's probably a spectrum to this. Not every building in the world can or will be like expertly designed. We see it all the time. Most of us live in houses that were, off the shelf, either tracked home or plan out of a book of plans or et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And then we experience some architecture in our life, which is a very small percent. Some have claimed it's 1% of the built environment or less.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is there's something in the middle too, right? Which is like better designed spaces at more scale and more volume.
Yeah.
But to me, that seems to be the most promising aspect of something like this, where if a firm or an architect can encode kind of their approach into a repeatable solution that is going to be applied at scale, which is not most quote unquote architecture. That's usually a one-off thing. Then the world does need more of that. Like it can improve people's day-to-day stuff, and not every building needs to be, to use the buzzword, bespoke.
That's right.
But it doesn't mean that it's like all or nothing. It doesn't mean that you only go down one of those routes. Like I think we still want to have the impact in our community spaces to make I guess we want to have a greater impact in certain places. And those are the ones that I think, like, good design does take time, period.
Yeah.
It does, because there's so much thought and consideration that has to go into that, and you can't algorithm that.
Yeah. Well, this type of dialogue is something that I think more people in our space need to be having. I think one of the things that it's frustrating for me is when you're a technologist or in the technology space, I feel like there's a kind of an accepted role that you often play, and that is to hype that technology, get people excited.
It's the old Cedric Price quote, right? Technology is the answer. Now, what's the question? Yeah, you're the hammer, and you only have use that tool for every problem that comes along.
Right. Yeah. And then you see that come out, like, so, and you also see this consumption of marketing information around certain concepts and sort of the regurgitation of that to certain clients. Like, generative design is the thing, Autodesk is pushing it, and I'm going to try to create a market for it, or like kind of really promote it as like a cheerleader of sorts. But I think we're also at a moment where there's so much information and data and technology available, where a critical eye on, is this making it better, is increasingly important. And really kind of thinking about also the duality of the technology, and both its benefits and perhaps its scary aspects. If I think about the Internet of Things, for example, and buildings that are increasingly more intelligent, you have enormous opportunity to create scenarios where you can really optimize their operations, save energy, right size your building program because you understand how the spaces are being utilized. But then on the other hand, you have kind of more nefarious ends in play. Like, is this invading privacy? Is this creating a cybersecurity hole where my building can be hacked? Is it really exposing these risks? And I think it's really, I say this a lot to other architects. It's sort of like, architects need to be involved in this conversation more than anything else, I feel, because I remember sort of architecture 101, you're kind of maybe designing your first house plan, and you need to understand the distinction between the public space and the private space of a house, or any other operation like that. Or if it's retail, it's the front of house and the back of house,
right.
Restaurants and so on. So we're trained very early to think about public and private, and what this means from a spatial quality and environment type of thing. But a lot of that's being dissolved, where you might be in the seemingly private space, but if you've got an Alexa sitting in that room, it's not. Is it really public or is it really private?
Right.
And I think that kind of critical, like finding what is the answer. or where can an architect, help guide and position these new opportunities in a way that isn't, crossing the line on things that, some people value quite highly, which is privacy. And, I don't want my house to go haywire like in Mr. Robot, because some hacker got into it and is now turning the lights on and off on me.
Yeah. I think a healthy dose of skepticism is a virtue at that point, right? Because you are a technology guy. I think people probably do have an expectation when they talk to me or you regarding like what your point of view is going to be regarding technology. And that is like, more technology. And it's not the case. I think it does take that healthy dose of skepticism to say like, no, I don't have any IoT devices in my house for these reasons. And what was interesting was I had an electrician out doing some work and he was like, just put a smart plug over there. And I'm like, okay, let me tell you about smart plugs. And he was like blown away. He says, dude, I use these on every single project. I had no idea that, it was, obviously it's on your Wi-Fi. Now it's a potential threat on all of your network activity, potentially, right? Like it doesn't mean it is, but at the same time, he was like, I'd never even considered that. And how many clients does he see every week where he's like, just pick up one of these smart plugs or this switch or this thermostat or whatever, where it's like seemingly the outcome is, or the benefits are X, Y, and Z, but no one's talking about the nefarious stuff that could happen there. It's really interesting because like, I think that the ideal picture is the one that typically gets painted in these conversations. And you do need somebody there to be like, yes, and be aware of all of these things and make sure they're in the meeting minutes, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I think that is not to say that stuff like this cannot have enormous benefit. I mean, I think as a society, we have collectively accepted that smartphones have made aspects of life a lot better in many instances. The ability to kind of place an order, text, message, check your network. It has its benefits and its advantages, but we did, I think, also collectively give up certain things when we went that route, and it opens up all sorts of I think interesting political paradigms as a result as well. Like I really appreciated Andrew Yang's perspective on shouldn't people be buying our data from us?
Yeah. Instead
of having it just be up there for free where we're essentially the product, and starts to create a new line of thinking in terms of public policy. And I think it's extremely fascinating and a conversation that we absolutely need to be having. And automation too. Yeah. What happens when, I make algorithms for a living. Automation is a big part of our business model and helping people try to find efficiencies and things like that. But there are enormous consequences to automation if it's positioned as a way to replace labor. And you can both create jobs, but you can also destroy livelihoods with it. You're wielding really powerful stuff when you're dealing with technology.
I was just the other day, I installed the DuckDuckGo privacy browser on my phone. It was the recommended browser by this new site that's out there for, when it's really taking privacy and security into consideration. And the first thing that it tells me is, because it's like the first time I'd used the browser, and I'm sure it doesn't do this every time. Maybe it does, but it said like Amazon and Google were both trying to watch you go to this website. And it's like, I just installed this browser.
Yeah.
This is a brand new install in a phone where every application is sandboxed. So how does that work? And it just starts to get you to think like how hard people are trying to get this information to create this profile so that they can target advertising at you amongst the many other things that they're actually then selling that data to. Like I'm going through a refinance in my house. How many people now have my name, email address, physical address? Because those companies are like your LG TV is, when you go in to update the firmware, like they're making, how much of their money that they're making in their revenue every year is based on selling your data to somebody else, because TV prices keep going down. People only buy a new TV every 10 years? So how else are they going to make money off of you as recurring revenue? They've got to find ways. They don't have to, but they do find ways to do that.
Yep.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy making.
No question. And, I think about what this means for as built environments become smarter, which again can have enormous impact on being able to moderate and control energy consumption, reduce waste, potential waste, right-size buildings to where you're not projecting how your building is going to be used. And maybe you don't need to build a new facility at all as like a clinic because you can optimize your current space. Enormous benefits. But the idea that you can be walking through,
a data collection machine,
a public space becomes a data collection machine. The idea that you enter into a lobby and it's like, it knows everything about your day-to-day habits, which, it sort of already does into some respect. But hey, I saw you stopped to watch a soccer game in Central Park. Would you like to buy a new Reebok set of shoes? And you didn't know. I'm like, I just took a walk.
and a lot of it's not even personalized. Like you talked about Alexa being in your kitchen, right? It's like, well, there's 6 people in my house. It doesn't know who, and it doesn't. I mean, it'll ask, "Hey, we can make Alexa personal for you. Would you like to, tell me who you are so that I recognize your voice?" And the answer is like always no. But okay, so my wife is searching for coffee makers for a gift for, let's just say, me, and then all of a sudden I'm walking through a mall or whatever, and a personalized quote unquote advertisement pops up that says, "Hey, I noticed you were shopping for coffee," and it's like, no, I wasn't. Somebody else in my house was, and you just ruined it for me, right? Because on some levels it's creepy personal, and on other levels it's totally anonymous within a small subset of people, and those wires get crossed all the time. It's just not very smart in many ways. But it is kind of operating under the assumption that more data is better, and just applying that to your persona. Yeah,
that's right.
I didn't see this conversation going that direction, but I think it's a really good one to be having.
I mean, when it comes to technology, I mean, in some ways it is the conversation in my view. When it comes to, where is the future? What is the future of technology? Are we orchestrating our collective knowledge and our tools towards ends that are going to benefit the built environment and the people that occupy them? Are we motivated by other factors that may not have the best interests of others at heart? These are, I think, critical conversations that inform practices and inform the adoption of tools. I really liked. I don't know if you've ever read any of Kevin Kelly's work.
He
has
huge fan.
Yeah, What Technology Wants.
Yeah,
it's a great book. How old is it? I don't remember when he actually wrote and published that one. I feel like it's been close to 18 years. I'll have to check on that, but it's an older book now. But it's so relevant. I mean, I love the sections of that book that talk about the Amish, and he spent a lot of time with the Amish.
Yeah.
And we tend to think about communities like that as being very anti-technology. And he starts to discuss, well, actually, that's not the case. What they do is they'll bring in technology into their community, and they'll have people evaluate technology. And then the way that they decide whether or not to bring it into their community or not is by weighing what the potential benefits are to the community, but also what they may lose as a result of having that adopted. I thought, wow, what a powerful way to think about all of this stuff when it comes to making an investment in training on analytics, or saying, hey, you know what, we're going to invest in this new automation script as a company, and being able to say, on the surface, this seems like it's going to deliver X, Y, and Z, but what might we lose as a result of doing it? And weighing those pros and cons, looking for the unforeseen benefits, but also perhaps detriments in the context of a business culture, I think is really important. And then also figuring out where the barriers and the roadblocks may be for getting to the benefits is also critical. And that's hopefully what we try to bring to the conversation as a group too, is just like helping enable those types of conversations.
I kind of, I appreciate the writing that you do, Nate, on your website, because I think it's typically coming from a point of view that is not the obvious. I think that's how I would describe it, is you like even taking this most recent example that we're just talking about on the podcast, the computers are hard article, right? It's like you need to take a clean look at your assumptions. And I think you need to take a clean look at, like you're talking about with the What Technology Wants book, is what are going to be the behavioral changes, good or bad or both, that need to be weighed when making this decision, because those can have long-term good or detrimental effects. I think it kind of does go back to the be careful what you ask for assumption that more is better, or that we need data. It's like you might not like what you find.
It's like there's an aspect of like, it's like the monkey's paw, you wish for something and it comes true, but it's like it creates a very different reality that you may not want.
Yeah. So you mentioned Kevin Kelly. Who else do you kind of look at as kind of, I don't want to say thought leader, but like who inspires you in reading and writing and or podcasting, or any way that you're kind of consuming this stuff out there? Who's influencing you in your thinking?
I've been, I like the work by the Suskines.
Yeah.
That's really been an interesting one, where they talk about professional biases has been one. I think that I have a blog article about sort of applying some of their thoughts about different levels of bias that you kind of see in professional culture, and looking at architecture and the professions around architecture in that way. The idea that professional bias can be something that kind of blinds you to certain opportunities relative to technology. He has like a form of bias called the AI fallacy, which is a really interesting look at where people think certain technologies are going versus where they are going, and the fear that that kind of surrounds certain topics that can often cause people to dismiss ideas. That's really been, I think I would say, informative to our work. I mean, when it comes to kind of influencing, my work, and I think the work, a lot of it is more conversational, and active. I have a group of friends that are in this space of technology, and we get into debates about different topics. We'll lend our point of view in a very open way. And even in my own team, people bring various articles and content to the table, and we talk about them and have debates about them. And I might even bring this back to this idea of the world that we currently live in. And we might have and attend various conferences, right, where we see a presenter talk about a topic for 20 minutes. And there might be like 5-minute Q&A. And one of the things that I've observed about these types of venues over the years is that it just kind of seems to be the same conversation happening over and over again, the same 20-minute conversation, the same 5-minute Q&A. Why don't we have better workflows? Why is training still a problem? Well, look, we solved this cool project problem, and it just kind of, it's the same. It's like the same thing. And the real meat of these events always seems to come after all of that content. It's like the conversational side of things. And one of the reasons I jumped at this idea of doing a podcast with you, and one of the reasons why I've been in the past have been motivated to do like these types of video podcasts and do Prove It and so on,
right, is
the long form. I really like the long form conversation now more than I do watching a 10-minute, 20-minute presentation about a subject, because you can get into some nuance and and you can get into like what we just got into. We started talking about privacy as a policy and as an outcome and a consequence of these tools. You don't get that in a quick hit presentation.
Yeah.
And so, I like listening to podcasts. I listen to a lot of long form, interviews, I would say. I like, I've been absorbing information from stuff that is not architecture, I guess. Like I love like watching, videos and tutorials just about craft, how to make things, like the 3D printing side of thing. And we often think about 3D printing as being like, oh, you just make a model and this thing will print it for you.
Perfect every time, right?
Perfect there is so much that goes into calibrating your 3D printer that I will argue that it is a craft.
It changes the way you make models, right? Like it goes back to it could reinforce or it could completely dismantle the way that you think about building a model so that it can be 3D printed.
Yep.
So cool.
Yeah. And that type of like just finding people that are experts in their craft or looking to push their craft forward and then looking at their content and watching it is kind of where I'm drawing a lot of inspiration at the moment.
I had a podcast episode with Dane Stokes from ZGF, and he kind of in passing, and I did include it in the show notes, but he had this mention of Colin Furr's YouTube channel, and he's this guy who just kind of builds whatever the challenge du jour is. Like he turned a bumper car into a drag racer, right? And I love watching that kind of stuff. I think like, cause Dane himself he's a fabricator. He has a background in design and fabrication. So he's turning his Porsche 914 into he calls it the Project Ankle Biter, but it's a fantastic project where it's basically a completely custom car by the end of this thing. And I love that kind of thing because it gets you out of your daily conversation that just kind of becomes like hard to separate the signal from the noise at some point. And it gives you another outlet to recalibrate why you think what you think, how you approach problem solving. I mean, there's so many examples of that kind of stuff that comes up by like I'm remodeled this space myself, right? And so when you actually have to make things, it actually makes you go back and reconsider how you model things and how you draw things and how you represent things and what you call things, because you've never had to take sequencing into account before, right? For instance. So all of a sudden, that's a major problem when you've got, this, in my case, this sauna in my room that is, I have to now remodel the entire space around it. It's funny stuff like you never think about in your day to day until you actually do it yourself. And I think like that's why I always ask people like what else is out there that's influencing you that's potentially outside of your day to day, because I think it does kind of show how it shows like where those other experiences and where those other channels of thinking are coming from, and it might give people a reason to get out of their own kind of comfort zone of where they operate day to day, especially as we're like on this screen all the time now.
Yeah.
Right. It is do things that are off the screen. Right.
Right. I'll tell you, two shows that I watch on the regular are, they're YouTube shows. I talked about how I don't watch new content. I say that in the context of like popular media, but I watch a lot of like just YouTube maker shows. Love Adam Savage's show. Mm-hmm. And like, just, sometimes he'll do like the live stream build of something, and just to watch him think about how he sorts parts at the front end of any project, and how he thinks through how he's going to build something. He did a pretty interesting one on just, making a vacuum form mold for a costume project he was working on. It was like great to see how he thought that through and created vacuum form piece. Like little things like, I never called this up, but I'm sure you've experienced, you're in the shop and you drop like a nut or a screw, and then you're like having to find it.
Yep.
And you don't quite know where to look. And he's like, one of the things I learned was it's called sending out a search party. If you just drop something, find a piece that's about the same size and drop and watch where it goes. because then it basically creates the search radius that you need to look to find the thing that you actually did lose. And I'm like, I'm using that now all the time.
Right.
And in some ways that also applies to debugging. It's influenced my work. If I encounter a bug and I don't quite know where it is, the idea of setting a search party or putting something in the code that kind of tells me where I need to be looking a little bit more closely for a class, and like being a little bit more surgical with your breakpoints and the debugging process, it all applies. The other one I will point your viewers to. I love it so much. I love this show, The Hacksmith. This is, and it's all fun, nerdy stuff. He makes basically the premise of their show is they'll take popular props, popular things that are out there, in, like Star Wars, like the lightsaber. This guy made a functioning lightsaber out of a plastic cutter.
My son sent me this. Yes,
it's like, and the way they think about a problem like that, and they're like, okay, we're going to use laminar flow to control the volume, and so we can get like a really nice, precise blade that can cut through things. It's great. They have an ongoing, or I don't know if they're still doing it. They had an ongoing project where they're like, I want to make the exoskeleton from Aliens, the one that Ripley comes out with. And
the big yellow one.
The big yellow one. And they go through this reverse engineering process. They're like, well, in the movie they did this, and they probably did it so it looked cool and refined on screen, but it actually needs to be engineered like this in order to get the right tubing to do this. And they did crush tests on the armature. Wow. It's so cool. So it's all about taking these kind of fantastical concepts from movies and comic books and using their shop, which is amazing. I'm like envious of their shop.
Yes,
they must have so much. They must get so much good ad revenue and Patreon supporters where they can just have this crazy shop and employs people where they're just like, yeah, we're going to make these things and then we're going to break stuff with it. It's like, it's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, YouTuber was not on the official list of acceptable careers when I was growing up. But now it certainly is. And it's so funny because like our kids will watch the crap out of YouTube. And I'm like, you can watch it all day long, but like, and you can talk about how you want to be a streamer and all this. I said, but you actually just have to do it.
You also have to be really talented. I think there's like
and you only get that way by doing it. It's like you have to actually put in the time to do it. I don't really mean to go down a rabbit hole here, but I think it's so interesting to watch what kids are interested in and how they can, you really literally can do anything with your life now. And I'm not going to tell you what you can't do, but you've got to do something. You've got to do it. You would make me so proud if you became a professional YouTuber. I think that would be so cool because there's so much good stuff on there. I once cited YouTube as like my favorite productivity tool. And it can also be exactly the opposite, right? We're talking about the rabbit hole, but man, there's so it is now, like we talked about on another previous episode. It is now the Haynes manual of how to take anything apart on your car and fix it, right?
Totally.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see. So I have a question. You mentioned Adam Savage's show and the Hacksmith. Obviously, I'm sure you were a fan of MythBusters and stuff, but did the algorithm point you in this direction of the Hacksmith? Successful algorithm?
I don't know how I first came up. I think it was probably like what you probably had a link that was sent to you for like his latest like lightsaber. Yeah. I think it was a couple of years ago where I came across a very similar one where it was like one of his first iterations of that experiment where he was heating up to high temperatures steel rods to get them to glow and have the same. And I'm like, oh shoot, what is this person doing? Came upon, I started digging deeper. I'm like, he made functional Wolverine claws and like Captain America's shield.
Yeah, like I'm in.
Part is that he breaks all of it. He makes it, and
it's not really, precious.
He puts it all through its paces.
That's cool.
And then the build up is like, okay, well, what happens if I take this new lightsaber I made? Will Captain America's shield withstand the? And I'm like, yes, this is everything I've ever wanted in a show.
A universal mashup, yeah.
Universal mashup.
That's awesome. I wonder if the algorithm is so smart that it can influence my son to influence me.
Right.
That's creepy. All right. Well, I really appreciate you hanging out today. There are other things I would love to talk to you about. I think we kind of touched on but we could save it for another time. I think that would be super fun.
Sure. Well, thanks for indulging the conversation longer than we had scheduled, but back to checking out the news, I guess.
Oh, don't do that. Yeah. Don't doom scroll. Hey, before you run off, is there, I will include links to anywhere that you would like to point people in your direction. So go ahead and spout those off right now.
Sure. Well, if you want to know a little bit more about Proving Ground, be sure to check out provingground.io. That's our main website. We have also a number of apps that you can buy and download at apps.provingground.io. Feel free to troll me on Twitter at Arcanate is my handle. I'm sure that'll be included in the link down below.
Yep.
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate what you're doing at Proving Ground, but also just like the way that you kind of push some buttons out there and get people thinking. I think that's super important. And
I hope so.
Hopefully we did a little bit of that today, but to more in the future. So cheers.
Great. Thanks, Evan. Cheers.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. You can see all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what I'm doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and of course, share it with your friends. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at trxl.co/podcast, where you can find every episode. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Just search for E. Troxel. Talk to you soon.